Our next set of notes features that. Our next set of notes focuses on another factor affecting the genetic equilibrium of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium equation, and that is genetic drift, which is a random movement of alleles within a population. So these frequencies can move around basically just on random chance, like pulling numbers out of a hat, or marbles out of a hat. If you have 7 red marbles and 4 blue marbles, and you happen to pull more blue marbles out, that's going to look like there's more blue marbles in the population in the bag, but there isn't really. So it's just a random sort of selectional concept. Usually this affects smaller populations. If you have a big population, those little small sample sizes tend to influence the way it looks at, sort of the way the real population is. But if you have a small population and you only select certain ones by random chance, it's going to make it look like it's something it's not. This can lead to what we call a bottleneck population, which is something that can become a problem for some species, because if you get to a bottleneck situation where you've selected randomly small amounts of traits, those traits have a very bad selectional advantage, all of a sudden that can put the population in danger. So natural selection will affect the whole population, but if you have small populations that get isolated, like on an island, or in small communities, it could also be in human populations, for example, based on religious preferences for who you marry, or different types of societal pressures, and things like that that can influence, and throughout history have influenced certain populations. So those populations tend to show certain traits in high levels more than other populations, simply because the selectional advantage. They got pulled out in a small random sample, and that sample ended up reproducing and producing a higher number in that population. So small numbers survive to pass on their traits that shouldn't normally be successful in those kind of things. Think back to the games we played in biology where you play like Birds on an Island, and sometimes people with the knife traits survived longer even though they probably shouldn't have, depending on the food type. So the greater prairie chicken is an example in Illinois of this kind of bottleneck population. It is an animal that is extremely endangered in Illinois because most of the prairies have gone away, and so therefore it's not seen as much, but it is an issue with types of traits being in a small population. Humans, about 7,000 years ago, almost went extinct. And that time period, called the Toba event, we had very few people left on the planet. And those people have a small population size spread over a large area, but still a small population size, so the amount of alleles that were left was very limited. And because of that, the human population today is actually not that different from each other. There's really not a lot of diversity compared to other organisms. A lot of other animals have much greater diversity in their gene pools than we do. But because of this event, we have a very limited number of individuals at that time period, that's what ends up happening. So the bottleneck event works like this. You have a parent population, and you drew out of the population a small sample, but in that small sample, there were more blues than there had been in the original population. Or if the first population was 50-50, all of a sudden there's more blue in this population, so the new population now has almost all blue in it. That could be something like a fatal disease, or a disadvantaged trait that makes you not be able to survive as well given your environment. You can't hide as well, you can't find food as well, you can't keep as warm. Things like that, the environment changes, all of a sudden you're in trouble. Maybe this a lot of times this happens with organisms where small populations get separated, the environment changes, they can no longer meet the environment because there's very few individuals left that have the traits that are successful, and so the groups die off. We call that the founder effect. It's a very special form of the bottleneck population. So a small group breaks off from the main group and forms a founding colony or a founding population. Again, islands are a great example. We see this in animals all the time. So inbreeding often occurs in these populations because there's such small population numbers that the inbreeding, there's nothing you can do about it. There's not enough individuals. Animals that are extremely endangered, cheetahs, for example, have basically gotten into this concept where now they've got massive amounts of inbreeding because there's so few of them left. Multiple examples of this concept, humans, animals, it doesn't matter, there's massive numbers of examples of us looking at this and seeing this. So island populations, as mentioned before, are huge examples of this. Things like the dodo, which is a member of the pigeon family. It's related to pigeons, related to doves. It became flightless. Most animals on those islands lose those traits like that and basically become very simple in what they can do, but then once the environment changes, they can't adapt to it. Religious groups play a big role in this. The Amish, for example, because if you're Amish, you only marry people who are in the Amish religion. A lot of religions have those kind of tenets in it. And when you do that, the problem is it starts to make a very simple, small group within a population. So it kind of keeps traits in there. So all of a sudden, certain traits that may not show up in the general population in large numbers show up in high numbers in those groups. Things like Tay-Sachs disease in the Ashkenazi Jews and the Amish, found in the general population, but really rare, more common in those populations because somebody in that group in the founder effect had it, passed the genes on, and as they married, it showed up more and more often because it's just more of a likelihood of it in a small group. So the Amish also have polydactyly, which means having more than 5 fingers, 6 fingers and so forth and so on, is actually not uncommon within the population. It's something that's in the population in general, normal humans have it. It's just within Amish population, somewhere along the line, the founder effect, somebody had it, and therefore it was passed in the generations. Ashkenazi Jews, the Tay-Sachs disease, as I mentioned before, which is extremely problematic and causes death of the younger children because it builds up fat in the brain and crushes the brain. Dunkers, the German Protestants, which is one of the groups that came over and found in areas like Pennsylvania and stuff like that. In their population, type A blood frequency is about 60%. In the US, that average is about 45%. They have a much higher rate of it. And a few other traits that are in that group, because obviously the group of people who came over just came to the United States and they lived in the community and they married within the community. There are a lot of people type A blood, more than the normal average population. And so therefore that population ended up having a much larger rate of it. Not a super big problem, but it is something that shows you how these populations work this way. In their case, the IB allele, which is the one that gives you B-type blood or AB blood, is almost nearly extinct. You have very few people in that population that have B blood or AB blood. It's really rare. They have I, and they have little I or IA, which means they have either type A blood or O blood. They have very little of other types of blood. So it's a very unique population that way as opposed to the regular population. So this shows you the simple concept here. If you have a general population, you split out into groups. All of a sudden this group found one little island, but almost all people had this one little blue trait. Here, it's kind of a mix like the original population. Here, it's almost all people with the red squares. So over time, these islands diverge, and you end up with a population that's only like this, population only like this. And this one's kind of the mixed population, even though they all start out the same. You may get different species. You may end up with ones that have traits that are negative and causes the death, positive helps them work better, just all kinds of different things that can occur that way. Same thing happens here with the founder effect with diseases. So you can have an original population, and that population is very rare for that one trait. But of the original founding group, one person had it out of a small number, and then over time, that means that trait becomes more prevalent, like in this case, a heart disorder or heart disease. So you can see how that can affect a population.